Hey everyone, Class 10, welcome back to the Explainer. I'm literally so excited you're here. If you've been staring at your history textbook, looking at all those scattered kingdoms and empires, and just wondering, how on earth did these turn into the modern countries we know today? Well, you're exactly in the right place. Today, we're going to completely decode the whole puzzle of European nation building. We're diving deep into Chapter 1, the rise of nationalism in Europe, and specifically zooming in on Topic 2, the making of nationalism in Europe. Stick with me, and I promise by the end of this session, this entire section is going to totally click for you.
And hey, for those of you joining us for the very first time, I'm your host, Divya Saini. As a PGT history teacher, my whole day is basically spent analyzing the exact concepts, the key words, and those tricky historical processes that the CBSE board just loves to test. So this isn't just some casual overview, right? This is a detailed, in-depth masterclass explainer designed specifically around your Class 10 board exams. We're breaking down all the crucial details from these 6 pages so you can walk into that exam hall feeling absolutely unstoppable.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the aristocracy and the new middle class. Second, what liberal nationalism actually stood for. Third, we'll cover the new conservatism after 1815. And fourth, we'll wrap up with the revolutionaries. Let's jump right in. Section 1, the aristocracy and the new middle class in a pre-nation Europe. To really grasp this, I need you to do something for me. Completely erase the modern map of Europe from your mind. Just wipe it blank. Picture the mid-18th century. There are literally no nation-states yet. Instead, there's this massive social divide. On one hand, you've got the landed aristocracy. Numerically, they were tiny, just a fraction of the population, but man, were they powerful. They own these massive country estates, they all spoke French just to show off their high status, and they kept their power locked down through strategic marriages. But then, industrialization hits, and it brings a totally new social group onto the stage, the new middle class. We're talking industrialists, businessmen, educated professionals. And they start aggressively demanding national unity and the end of all those aristocratic privileges. This commercial class, they are the absolute spark that ignites nationalism. Now, here is a major difference across the continent, and honestly, it's a classic CBSE exam trap you need to watch out for. The farming situation wasn't the same everywhere. In Western Europe, land was mostly farmed by tenants and small owners. But over in Eastern and Central Europe, the aristocracy kept a tight grip on power using vast, sprawling estates cultivated by serfs. Because of this, the middle class grew way slower in the East. So the whole push for nationalism, it looked very, very different depending on exactly where you were standing geographically. Moving right along to Section 2. What did liberal nationalism stand for?
So this newly emerging, educated middle class, they couldn't just fight with weapons. They needed a big, unifying idea to rally behind. And that idea was liberalism. You definitely want to commit this definition to memory for those short answer questions. The word itself comes from the Latin root liber, which simply means free. For our new middle class, liberalism stood on 3 main pillars: freedom for the individual, equality of all before the law, and politically, the idea of a government that only rules by the consent of the people.
Let's look at what they were actually demanding on the ground. Politically, they wanted to wipe out autocracy and those special clerical privileges. They wanted a constitution and a representative parliament. But, and listen, this is a huge but for your exams, equality before the law absolutely did not mean universal suffrage. No way. Women and men without property were completely shut out of political rights. Economically speaking, liberalism was all about free markets. They desperately wanted to abolish these crazy irrational state restrictions on moving goods and capital. Just imagine trying to do business when every single tiny town has its own separate taxes and weights. It was a nightmare.
So, how did they fix this economic mess? Well, that brings us to a massive keyword for your boards, the Zollverein. Formed in 1834, heavily pushed by Prussia, the Zollverein was a customs union that most of the German states ended up joining. It was brilliant, honestly. They used economic nationalism to basically pave the runway for political unification later on. By smashing those tariff barriers, they tied their economies together, making everyone realize, hey, we are so much stronger as one united bloc.
I absolutely love this number. 2. That's exactly how many currencies were left in the German-speaking regions after the Zollverein worked its magic. Before 1834, merchants had to deal with a chaotic, mind-numbing web of over 30 different regional currencies. 30. The Zollverein slashed that down to just 2. add in a massive new railway network, and suddenly you have this incredible economic mobility that just supercharged their nationalist feelings. All right, on to Section 3, a new conservatism after 1815, the Big Backlash. Right as liberal nationalism was really gaining steam, we see this dramatic, forceful backlash once Emperor Napoleon is finally knocked off the global chessboard. Let's walk through this timeline. In 1815, Napoleon gets decisively defeated at Waterloo. Almost immediately, the victorious European powers scramble to meet at the Congress of Vienna. Their main goal? Basically to hit the undo button on the Napoleonic Wars and slap the old aristocratic order right back into control, setting up these fiercely autocratic, conservative regimes all over the continent. Just picture Europe after the Congress of Vienna. You've got the major powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, sitting around a table literally redrawing the borders. They carved up territories to reward themselves and to permanently box in France so it couldn't expand again. They were treating the map like a giant puzzle, completely ignoring the actual nationalities of the people living on those lands. The Treaty of Vienna, which was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich, had a very clear checklist. Restore the Bourbon dynasty in France? Check. Set up buffer states on the French borders? Check. Their whole vibe was preserving traditional institutions, the monarchy, the church, strict social hierarchies. But here's the really fascinating twist. These conservatives didn't actually want to go all the way back to the pre-revolutionary days. Actually, scratch that. They realized Napoleon was onto something. They learned that modernizing their army, their economy, and their bureaucracy could actually make their autocratic rule even stronger. I always discuss the famous historical cartoon from this era called The Club of Thinkers. It just nails the vibe perfectly. In the drawing, the thinkers literally have muzzles strapped over their mouths. It's a great metaphor because these new conservative regimes were absolutely terrified of dissent. They couldn't handle criticism. So they slammed down incredibly strict censorship laws to control every newspaper, book, and play. Freedom of speech was effectively choked out. This takes us to our final act. Section 4. The Revolutionaries. So what happens when you tell passionate, educated people they can't speak their minds? Well, they don't just give up. They take the fight underground. Pushed by the sheer fear of being arrested or worse, the educated middle class started forming these elaborate secret societies across Europe. Their mission was crystal clear: train revolutionaries, spread liberal ideas, fiercely oppose those monarchies set up at Vienna, and above all, keep fighting for the ultimate goal of creating independent, sovereign nation-states. To really understand this, let's put a human face to the struggle. Meet Giuseppe Mazzini. Born in Genoa in 1805, he joined the secret society of the Carbonari. Because of his relentless, fiery push for a unified Italian republic, he was actually sent into exile when he was just 26 years old. But you know what? Exile didn't even slow him down. He just went and founded 2 more underground groups, Young Italy in Marseille and Young Europe in Bern. He literally inspired a whole new generation to keep the dream of liberty burning bright. And you have to remember this highly quotable line. It's a massive exam favorite. Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich famously complained, "When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold." It's just a perfect summary of how incredibly volatile and connected European politics had become by the 1830s. Metternich basically meant that any tiny liberal uprising or revolution starting in France would instantly spread like a virus across the continent, inspiring underground societies everywhere to rise up against the conservative order. And that wraps up today's Masterclass Explainer. But before you go, I want to leave you with a bit of a brain teaser. If these deeply conservative regimes tried so incredibly hard to crush the middle class and muzzle free speech, how did their own attempts at modernization, building railways, boosting the economy, how did that ultimately give the middle class the exact power they needed to trigger the massive continent-wide revolutions of 1848? Think critically about that paradox. Keep reading your NCERT texts, review these concepts, and I will see you in our next explainer where we tackle the Age of Revolutions.